So I'd go for this one because this has got quite a big dynamic range. This is the Devil's Bridge in Wales, mid Wales. My daughter was at Aberystwyth University, so I had a few years when I was going down visiting, picking her up and dropping her off, of going exploring various places nearby. So this is the Devil's Bridge. So anyone that used to watch Hinterland would recognise it. Okay, so usually what I would do is kind of get the dynamic range where I need it to be. And I'm kind of assuming the majority of people kind of know what is all about in Lightroom, maybe. I need feedback, verbal feedback. So what I'm doing now is I'm playing on the histogram here. So if I go up to the top here, you've got your basic adjustments of your exposure. So you can use the sliders. And if you see me moving this slider, you can see that the histogram's moving as well. I quite like doing it on the histogram itself because that's where my eyes are, because I'm keeping an eye on where my white point is, where my black point is, etc., where my tones are. So you can bring up your blacks, your shadows, your exposure, your midtones is exposure, highlights and whites. So I play around with it like that. Okay, so this is the area is much lighter now. So you can see down on the left-hand side my history of everything that I've done. So if I go back to how it was at the beginning, you can see it was very dark in the shadows and almost blowing out here, but not quite. So I've evened it out a bit here. I'll maybe add a little bit of clarity. So I get it kind of right. Add a little bit of curves. I mean, these things will change when I go to black and white. So that, as a color photograph, it's okay. It's more of a record shot. Okay, then I click on the black and white. There are options up here on the left-hand side of different presets that you can preview. Here's all the, hang on a minute, here's the black and white ones. But as soon as you press one of these, or if you go into the presets that come with the camera kind of thing, you lose a lot of the functionality on your development module over here. So I don't do that. I go to black and white and it just does a quick conversion. Okay, you can see we've lost a bit of the detail up here in the sky. We've lost detail back down here now. Okay, so then I start playing about. Once you're into black and white, you can get away with a lot more tonal contrasting. So I will throw the clarity up a little bit. I love using the dehaze because it really does use that micro contrast to add a bit more contrast there. You can put a little bit more of a tone curve in, but I don't do that yet. This is the powerful bit here, the color sliders. You might think, well, why am I playing with color sliders? I'm doing a black and white photograph. Because by just doing a straight black and white conversion, you've still got control of what the color channels are doing, and you can change the tonal value of the color channels, so it affects the picture. So you can either do it on the sliders, but then you don't necessarily know the red's not doing anything. There's not much red in there. Let's go yellow. So there's quite a bit of green in there. So you can see that's changing everything that has any yellow in it. And grass and anything that's green usually has quite a lot of yellow in it rather than green, bizarrely. I don't tend to do it on the sliders because you don't really know what it is that you're changing. There's this little crosshairs here that you can pick up. You click on it and you bring it across and you get a crosshairs. So then, using your mouse or your trackpad, depending on what computer you're using, you can see there, it will change the two colors, the two color channels that match that particular pixel that you are above. So areas that I know I want to change, I can just target them. I don't need to think about necessarily what it is, what color is it underneath there. So you can see that the orange and the yellow sliders are changing as I bring that down or up. So I can add more contrast in there. So if I go...
Sorry, Dawn, sorry to interrupt. What are you actually sliding there? I can see the sliders moving, but what are you controlling those with?
See this crosshair? So I've picked
yes.
this little target here. I've picked this up.
Yep.
And I've pulled it across. So if I put it on the light bit, you can see the crosshairs.
Yes.
Yeah. So that is targeting that particular pixel. that's underneath that, and then I'm tracking up and down. So if you had a mouse, you'd use the wheel and go up and down the wheel.
Right, that's the question.
That's what you mean, yeah. I'm on a Mac, or a Mac trackpad, so I'm using 2 fingers and sliding up and down, maneuvering up and down on my trackpad to do that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does now. Yeah, thanks.
Great, perfect, good, hooray. Okay, so up here in the sky, obviously it's going to be blues. So you can see on the color channels, you can see now that the box next to the blue is highlighted. And as I play about with it, it goes up or it goes down. So I can bring a little bit more detail into the sky there by bringing that down a bit. Okay, now let's see what's going on in here. I don't want to change the oranges and the yellows. So I kind of just play around and see what other tones are in there. There's not really any other colors in there, so I don't want to play around with them too much more. So that's me change my color channels. You can do split toning with now this is where, if I put the saturation up, this is where you can put tones in. So like you can create a sepia tone or a selenium tone or those kinds of things. And you can do it either just the highlights, just the shadows, or both. Or if you just leave it alone, pure black and white. I used to have a thing for a selenium tone, which was a little bit left over from my days when I was using Silver Effects Pro. When I first started using Silver Effects Pro, Lightroom didn't have the functionality that it does have now with the selective areas that you can change. So that's all the basics there. And then I'm looking at this and I'm thinking this part here down in the gorge is still too dark for my liking. But obviously I don't want to change anything else, so I don't want to do a universal adjustment. So I'll start using the radial or the straight gradient or the brush. It's been absolutely wonderful since they've introduced these, because you can do everything in Lightroom now that you used to be able to do in Silver Effects Pro. So I've been to Silver Effects Pro a long time ago. So because the gorge is a little bit of a funny shape, I could take a radial filter. So you just pick it up, create an oval or a round, get it to the shape you want it to be, and then use the sliders. You've got all the functionality now if you're using Lightroom Creative Cloud as opposed to, or Creative Suite, whatever it's called, rather than standalone old Lightroom that you don't get the updates for anymore. And you can do this sort of thing. So you can bring the shadows up there, and you can do fine tuning. Obviously the hue and the saturation are blanked out because I'm in black and white. If I was in color, you'd be able to change the saturation and the hues. Now the hues is a fairly new thing. I can add to the clarity a little bit if I wanted to. I can do the exposure up a little bit, just a wee bit. So I'm bringing out the detail now. So if I zoom in on that, you can now see the detail. Whereas if I go in my history to before I put the radial filter in, you can see the difference. This brings the detail out there. Now, if I go back down there, when you go back in the history, if you then make another adjustment, it will get rid of everything that you've done since then. Because the thing about Lightroom is as well, is that it's not affecting your actual, I don't know how many of you use Lightroom as opposed to Photoshop. When you're doing adjustments in Photoshop, you're actually adjusting the original file. Lightroom, you're not. All you're doing is creating a list of an algorithm, a list of actions that you want Lightroom to create, to add to the image when you export it. So you never are actually adjusting the original picture. So I can pick up the brush here, the selection brush. Yeah. So as you can see, with my 2 fingers again, I'm going up and down my trackpad to make it bigger or smaller. The outer ring is the feathering, the inner ring is the main one. So you can make it as hard or as soft as you like. And then if I click on this show selected overlay down at the bottom here, you can just paint in the area that you want to adjust. And if you go a bit crazy with it, you can erase a little bit as well. Or if later you find that, oh, that's gone over the line or whatever. And if you have this auto mask on, if you've got hard edges, it will cut off at the hard edges. So it means you can see where you've painted. I can click that off now. and then go back to my adjustments, and I can add a little bit of exposure there. I can bring the shadows up. So it's a little bit more precise than just using the radial filter that might not, because what I'm going to do here with a radial filter, this is distracting my eye way too much. It's really pulling my eye into the side there, and I don't want that. So I'm going to pull the highlights and the whites down a bit, maybe even the exposure down. Not too much, because otherwise it all looks very flat, but then add a little bit of clarity to, because I want my eye to kind of pull to the bridge a little bit. Now I'm still thinking that this is a little bit dark, but I don't want to brighten it all up. All I want to do is pick out the highlights and things. So I'm actually going to do another brush expo, and I'm going to do more rough there. I can, and as I said before, I can erase parts of it if it's too much. And I'm going to bring the exposure up a touch, but then I'm going to bring the whites up. So then obviously the blacks and the shadows will remain the same, and it will only affect the highlight tones. And that's just bringing up this detail here in this bit of rock, and a little bit more here. So I'm getting more of a lead up the gorge there, and to the, because obviously the bridge is what is bringing our attention. This I'm finding is a little bit too bright, so I'm just going to use the graduated filter, which is just like putting a filter on your camera on front of the lens there, and bring that down. Ooh, that's far too much. I think that's because I brought the blues down. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go and change the blues again. If I go back down to the blues here, I'm going to pick that up again, and then lighten that up a little bit, because that sky was getting too dark and unrealistic. Now, I'm reasonably happy with that. If I had a picture where I wanted to add a vignette of some sort, I'm not a big fan of strong vignettes, but you know, a little bit of a vignette's quite nice. Oh, before I go on to that, sorry. There is another bit down here in calibration, right at the bottom here. Now this affects your color channels as well. It's another way of adjusting black and whites. So if you change the hue of your reds, greens and blues, again, the reds won't make any difference because there's next to no red in this picture. Right, let's try the greens. There's greens in this picture. You can see that it's changing it. It's being quite slow. There's a delayed reaction. I quite like that with a little bit more green highlighted. And then you've got the same idea with the blues, because you're changing the hue of the blue behind the scenes. So the way that it's affected in the color channels changes. So that's another way of changing the tonal value of the grays that were within your picture.
Dawn?
Yes?
Can you, what way you got that? Can you blow that picture up to 100%?
Yeah.
So as I can have a look at what's happening in the shadows.
It's fine. It hasn't gone noisy.
No.
And I've got no haloing.
So
if you push it too, yeah, because you're right. If you push it too far, if we go up to some sharp edges up here, if I was to push this too far, like if I just go really silly here,
or you just
and bring the blues right down, you start getting all sorts of horrible things going on.
No, I don't.
As long as you don't push it too far, then you won't get artifacts or anything.
Thanks, that's great.
No, that's good. Good question. The other little trick is, I don't know how many of you know this one. I love this one. If you press Alt on a PC and Option on a Mac, hold it down while you hold the masking down for your sharpening, you can change how much of your image is actually getting sharpened. Yeah. Oh, good. I'm glad this is news to somebody. I love this. Because most people, you know, the masking is on nothing. You do your sharpening and it's sharpening every single pixel in your picture. But not every single pixel in your picture needs to be sharpened. For example, the sky there is quite flat. We don't need that to be sharpened. So if I press Option down and slide the slider across, anything that goes black is not getting sharpened. It's only the white outlines that are getting sharpened. So I generally have mine around 70, 65 to 75 is generally where I have my sharpening at, which means you see that sky is pure black up there. It means none of those pixels are getting sharpened. So you're not going to have artifacts on your sky. Fabulous. I love it.
Dawn,
Okay.
actually, it's exactly the same functionality in Elements, I guess, probably full Photoshop as well.
Possibly. I haven't used Elements since about Elements 4.
Well, Elements
got Lightroom, so I don't. And I know it's got a lot of functionality now that it never
Elements 14 onwards, is because I discovered that last year sometime, and it's really just sort of changed your life in terms of the sharpening routine.
Yeah. Okay, just to go back to the vignetting, I got distracted. So vignetting, you can just add a vignette, simple dimple. And, you know, there it goes, in it goes. I mean, obviously for this picture, it doesn't need a vignette, but if you wanted to put a vignette on, you can just do that, but that is uniform, you know, it's standard. I prefer to actually use the gradient filter and just pull it in from the side and just bring it down a wee bit if needed. I mean, literally a third of a stop, half a stop, maybe, next to nothing. Just pull it in and concentrate the eye a little bit and change the angle of the filter there if you wanted to. The other option is to use the radial filter, plonk it in the middle there. Now, the radial filter, you can filter either inside by show selected mask overlay. At the moment, it's changing the pixels inside the circle or oval, whatever I've drawn. Down here, you've got a checkbox which says invert. If the checkbox invert is checked, the inside is getting adjusted. Uncheck it, the outside is being inverted, is being affected. So I can pull that out a wee bit because it's feathering quite far in. And then turn that off so you can see the effect. And then I can vignette that way. And that is a much more subtle vignette if you do want it on all corners than using the actual vignette tool. And you can adjust how big or how small your feather is. Here's the feathering. So if I put the mask overlay on again, feathering is automatically as default set at 50, but you can pull it so it's a harsh, why would you? Or you can pull it so it's almost 100, so you've only got that tiny little bit is not affected, and then the rest is. So likewise, if you had something that was quite dark and you just wanted to pull the middle up, you could actually just pull the middle up. But I need to make that a wee bit small to make it work on this particular picture. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. But anyway, I don't want that on this picture. I'll switch it off. Okay, any questions? So that is basically how I process my black and whites. Basically, if I spend more than 5-10 minutes on a photo, transforming it to black and white and playing around with it and, you know, basically doing your dodging and burning and all these kinds of things, if I'm having to play around with that much, I consider it's just not good enough and I'm not wasting my time. I mean, you do need a reasonably decent picture to start with. But it's very versatile, and once you get used to the flow that you can have, that you can do, and you play around with it and you get used to that flow. The other good thing for people that don't necessarily know much about it, I mean, this picture doesn't need it, but you've got all the rotations and the corrections for verticals and things up here as well. By default, it appears right at the bottom of the develop module stream, but I've moved it to the top because with my architectural photography, generally I'm straightening all my lines before I start processing. So I'm not bothering on processing pixels that are going to get cropped out. So you can rotate, obviously, goes around the central pivot point. Horizontal will change on the vertical axis. And vertical, come on, it's playing up. Vertical changes on the horizontal axis. if you've been looking down or something, or looking up on something and you want to straighten it up. So those are quite handy too. Any questions?
When do you use black and white when you take the pictures from the camera?
Sorry, Mary, I couldn't hear that.
Why don't you use black and white rather than colour when you're taking the pictures?
When I take the picture in camera?
Yes.
What I do in camera, if I'm purposely doing black and white, I tend to change my preview to black and white, but I will always shoot in RAW, because obviously you've got better resolution in RAW for a start. But if you take your picture as a JPEG in black and white, your versatility for processing it afterwards is minimal, because the camera has already put its own tonal values on it, depending on what your settings are in camera. So then all you can do is change your exposure values and do some dodging and burning. You can't do that color channel changes. And it's those color channel changes that are really powerful, I think.
Okay, right, thanks. That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if you want to, if you just want a quick black and white out of your camera, then shoot RAW plus JPEG and have it on a black and white setting. But your RAW will always be in color, so that's you've got the best of both worlds then.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Certainly, I found it really interesting. There's a lot of processes you were doing there that I'd kind of forgotten about, but I'd only used them in colour. I'd never actually thought about them in black and white.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really interesting.
Yeah.
You know, because I mean, black and white is not my kind of favourite choice, but I begin to see that, you know, that there's a lot of benefit in you know, when you can manipulate it a bit more, just to pull out the detail.
I mean, you can use the presets on the left-hand side there as a starting point, but then go over to the right and tweak them if you've got a favourite one that you like.
Yeah.
You know, you're not lumped just with that as an action kind of thing.
Sure. I mean, I have played with that, but quite often I kind of say, no, forget it and go back to the original and just play around with the develop module.
Yeah. It can give you an idea of the different looks that your picture can take.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
There isn't a means by which you can get rid of keystoning, is there, in Lightroom?
Of whating?
Keystoning. You know, where the...
I think, you know, the transform part, was that?
Yeah, the transform here. You mean like to change your perspective, your verticals and things?
Yeah.
Yeah, this vertical one. So if you've taken a picture and you've realised that you're slightly looking up, so everything is kind of going like this or like this.
Yeah.
Vertical one will correct it for you.
Can you show me on that?
Yeah. Let me. I'm just trying to think. Yeah. Look, this picture here has got a door, so that's got definite verticals. So if I show you here. So obviously I shot it straight. So I'm manipulating it so it changes. And you can click this constrain box so it crops in. So if I had taken it like that, I can then play with this slider here to bring it back.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
And then go back to the original.
Hopefully you can.
It's okay. It's Lightroom, it doesn't adjust it. Until I export it, nothing's happened.
Yeah.
That's, you know, a misconception about what you're doing with Lightroom.
It's always good to, in that kind of situation, if you're aware that there is a possibility of keystoning, to take more of the overall picture so that you can flip off. Shoot wide. If you know that you're going to have to manipulate it, for example, you just cannot get the angle on it, and you know you're taking it and you're going to manipulate it, shoot it wider than it needs to be, so you've got that cropping. Yeah, absolutely. The other handy thing that other people might not know about, this is one of the things I find that people don't know about Lightroom as well, is you have the option to make a virtual copy. Yes, that's good.
Yeah, so if you've kind of got your color as you want it, and you quite like it in color, but you also want to try it in black and white, so you will have a black and white and a color version. If you right click it, up here you've got create virtual copy. It doesn't actually physically make a copy of your picture. You've still only got one original, but it just means that you're then creating a new algorithm for a different one. So when you export these two, they'll export as two separate files with different instructions. So you end up with two different pictures.
That's right, but you can't put them in different directions. You can only put them, both of them, in the same direction. I tried to put one in one file.
If you export them at the same time, but if you export them separately, then you could export them into different places.
Ah, right, okay.
Yeah, but you'd have to do them one at a time.
Yeah.
Yeah, for them to be filed somewhere different on your computer. Because basically all Lightroom is, some people think that the pictures are physically in Lightroom, but they're not. Lightroom is just like a big fancy RAW converter. So your files are within a particular file somewhere on your computer, and the algorithms that are within this is just showing you previews, and it's creating pointers.
Yeah. And
then you're telling it to save it somewhere else when you export it.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
I was just going to just a bit of what Martin was asking about the keystoning. You know how there's the option to make sure you've got the lens that you've used selected?
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
Does that not help it as well?
It does. Now I use Fujifilm, and the camera does it on export from the camera. So Lightroom isn't involved in it. It's already done before it comes in here. But let me see, where is it? Lens corrections here. There are profiles. So you can add, if you have taken your picture with particular, I don't know what that was taken with then. Let's see this one. It doesn't particularly like Fujifilm ones. Everything that I've got here is taken with Fujifilm, so it's not going to do it. But here, basically, if you've taken with a Nikon, a Canon, a Sony, or whatever, and you want to enable profile, you tell it. Usually it picks up because it knows what the metadata is from the picture. It's all embedded in the XMP file, so it will pick up what you've taken the picture on, and if it's available within Lightroom, it will add the corrections that are that Adobe have been given for the corrections for that particular combination of camera body and lens, and add them to the picture before you even see it. If you don't have it enabled, you can also do it manually, because here you've got a distortion option if your picture seems distorted. So I sometimes use that if I've done quite wide or something like that, or I think that just doesn't look right. And so you can use the distortion slider as well as the transform sliders to change the look of the picture as well. Does that make sense? If you, like I say, you can have it here, so like Canon, and then it will ask me what model I'm using, and then so if I go to then like the lenses, if I tell it that I use a 35mm lens, it will do stuff to it, because Adobe have been told that it adds a little bit of a vignette and it softens the edges and it distorts to this degree, etc.
Yeah.
So then it will add the corrections to it. Any other questions?
Yep. You don't use presets at all, Dawn?
No. When I import into Lightroom, because Fujifilm haven't got the assay sensor, the sharpening is different. So I have a preset on import that applies like Fujifilm sharpening settings rather than the default Adobe ones. But that's the only thing that I preset. Mm-hmm. What you can do, which is quite handy, like especially if you've done a shoot and like especially if it's indoors or something, artificial lighting and the white balance is off, you can make an adjustment. So here's your white balance. I didn't cover white balance because it isn't really all that relevant unless it's really off in black and white, but it's another way of changing the color channels within your picture. So say I'm going to change the white balance on that, and then I've taken a whole series of these pictures of my dog. I can then highlight however many pictures there are in the shoot, and then there's this thing called sync. So I can click sync, and let me move that. It will come up and you can check box all the things that you want to sync across the whole range of pictures. So I'm going to take everything off. You always have to have the process version ticked. Then I can just tick on white balance, and then I can synchronize it, and it will put that white balance, as you can see the pictures down below, that hasn't worked for those 2 landscape pictures. It's bloody awful, but you get the idea. So, you know, if there's lots of pictures that you need to do the same action to, you can do it via synchronization. Any other questions?
No.
Cool.
You must have a lot of patience.
Yeah, can I ask a question? It's purely terminology I'm talking about here, though. I've heard the expression a lot. People talk about dodge and burn. I'm not 100% sure what you're referring to when you say dodge and burn.
Okay, dodge and burn is an old Lightroom term. So when you were exposing the paper with light through a negative, if you were, I always get this mixed up, if you were burning it, you were making parts lighter, so you were exposing them more to the light. So you, oh, sorry.
Around.
Is that the wrong way round?
Yeah. No, that's right.
Somebody says that's right, and somebody says that's wrong.
When you're burning it, you
burn darkens things.
When you're burning, you're darkening. Okay, so when you want something to be darker, you therefore want to keep it shaded for longer, because you don't want the light getting through to it, so you block it. And if you're dodging, then you are exposing it for longer. Is that right?
Correct.
Correct. Hurrah. So basically, when I was doing my selective areas with the radial filter and that is you know, I'm either making it darker or I'm making it lighter by changing the channels, like the highlights, shadows, whites or blacks or midtones within that area. So that's essentially what I'm doing, and it's the same as dodging and burning in the past in the darkroom rather than the Lightroom. Does that make sense?
Correct.
Yes.
Good. As long as I answered the question and it makes sense to the person that asked the question.
Dawn, I take lots and loads of photographs, and my Lightroom's slowed right down. Can I take the catalogue off the computer and put it to an external hard drive, or do I need to create a new catalogue to do so?
No, you'll create an awful lot of problems for yourself if you create a new catalogue and then you're trying to work with 2 catalogues. I find it an absolute nightmare if I've got 2 catalogues going, because I always forget to change catalogues when I'm doing stuff, and then you can't find stuff. Whatever you do when you're moving files, catalogues or whatever, make sure you've got Lightroom open and you're doing it within Lightroom. Otherwise you'll confuse Lightroom totally. So for example, if you've got lots of pictures on your hard drive, but you want to transfer them onto a hard drive, onto an external hard drive, then you can do it within Lightroom. If you go to the library module, and then you, folders, where is it? Here it is, because I've collapsed all of this. So here you've got, this is what's on the computer, and this is what is on external hard drives. So depending on whatever your hierarchy is in your folder system, you would open up wherever the picture is, whatever folder it is there. Well, let's do Shannon as Puck. That'll give you a laugh. Then you would drag this folder and put it wherever you were wanting to put it afterwards. And you do it within Lightroom, and it will do it on your system in the background. But it's also telling those connections I was talking about that Lightroom have to the individual folders. Otherwise you'll get those exclamation marks saying file not found, file not found. And then you have to go and try and find the files and reconnect them. So do it within Lightroom. Same idea with the catalogue. Now, for the life of me, where is it? Trying to remember where it is, whether it's within catalogue settings. It's one of those things that you only do once or twice in your lifetime, so you never remember where it is exactly. Tell you what, Lynn, I'll have a play and I'll work it out,
Brilliant.
And I will write a little instructions sheet on how to do it and send it.
That would be good. That would be good, because everything's slowed so far down, it's getting frustrating now.
If you keep stuff on your hard drive, it just doesn't like it at all.
Yeah. No,
so, I mean, I must admit, I do have my catalogue on the hard drive, because the catalogue is just lists and previews. It's not the big files. It's keeping all your raw files on the hard drive, which is really slows it down. So that's the stuff that you need to get off onto your
super. I'll wait with anticipation, Dawn. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, I'll do that.
Yeah, I have a lot of problems with Lightroom when it keeps updating, when it creates a new catalogue, and I just keep running out of space, and it's a real pain. You know, and it keeps losing, can't find files, just can't get to the bottom of it.
I know, it can get in a real mess sometimes. Because I mean, I have had, I don't know how many of these things, and having to, you know, have another one and another one. You can imagine the amount of pictures I take and have on different external hard drives. And I think I've probably got about 3 of them. I mean, if I go into this again, you can see volumes. So I've now got commercial for my work and landscape for my landscape stuff, which I transferred off of DSBP 7. And at the moment, I've only got 7, 5 and 2 linked up to this particular catalogue from ones that I've needed to resource, because previously I was working on a different computer, and then it's like, do you change the whole thing over, or you take bits of it? So, you know, mine's in a little bit of a mess as well. I really ought to practice what I preach. So yeah, it can be an absolute nightmare when stuff either breaks down or you need to transfer it over onto different hard drives or create new catalogues and stuff. It's not so bad now. I hated going onto the subscription service. I refused to do it until my camera wouldn't work with the old one. But it has made it a bit easier, because now when it's updating, you're just still in the same catalogue. It's not changing it every time. Any other questions? I'll take Shannon off, bless her. Go back to the collections.
Okay. So no further questions?
No.
No. Okay. Well, I'd like to say, you know, thank you very much, Dawn. It really was very interesting indeed.